In this video, I'll be going over the rapidly growing Typhoon Surigae, which is possibly bringing a big threat towards portions of the eastern Philippines, as it can possibly become a super typhoon here as we go later into the week here and possibly into next week here. But without further ado, let's get into the forecast. So here's a look now at what we're seeing here on the on one of the satellite images here on this major and extremely strengthening Typhoon Surigae, which possibly can make its way towards a super typhoon here once we get into the next few days here. So you can kind of see a very clear eye, of course, within this very strong typhoon right now. And you kind of see we are seeing that counterclockwise spin, which is exactly what you want to see in a cyclonic low pressure. And you can see there you go, you got that eastern quadrant, really seeing the extreme amount of convection there, as well as some really tight amounts of vorticity within the cell. You got some widespread outer bands, of course, stretching across this whole storm. You got the outer bands here towards the east here, you got the outer bands towards the west. So we have some pretty nice looking bands that are stretching away from this low pressure. You can kind of see the most amount of convection within this within the eye wall of this typhoon here again. So we got the eastern Philippine Islands here. And as it continues to go throughout the east coast, it's possibly be a bigger threat here towards the northern islands, as we'll be seeing this storm become a lot stronger and a lot more widespread hurricane winds here and tropical storm winds across portions of the Philippines here, looking at maybe getting as high as 125 knots here, so getting very close to maybe becoming a super typhoon here. And again, this is the latest update here on the IR here. You see very clear eye, very strong eye wall, and some really strong and strengthening bands here. So right now, Surigae is at 138 miles an hour, so it is sitting here at basically, I mean, it's basically a super typhoon at the moment here, but again, as it strengthens possibly to 125 knots here, we're talking getting over 145 miles an hour here. So basically, it's not too far from becoming officially a super typhoon here. So I think officially the super typhoon is gonna be 125 knots or 130 knots here. So I mean, we're getting there. We're getting there here. You see on visible satellite imagery here, as it's becoming, I believe, at this point. I'm not exactly sure how far the Philippines is ahead, but right now they are in Saturday. And I'm actually recording this, or actually, no, it would be Sunday, so I'm actually recording this video on Saturday for the United States here, but obviously it will be Sunday for portions of the Philippines here. See, clear day here on satellite imagery. You got a nice clear eye, of course, right down the middle there. That storm, you got the very strong convection there on the eye wall of this storm here. So again, very a very organized storm here. I mean, it definitely looks like it's a category 4 typhoon here. You got the really nice counterclockwise convection here, a really nice amount of vorticity there, and you kind of see that very little amount of vorticity there across portions of the eye. Very little cloud cover. We're seeing very little convection, and we're still seeing some really high vorticity there. That's kind of where we're really watching out for the highest amount of vorticity. And then you got those outer bands, of course, moving towards the counterclockwise region here. Exactly what you want to see as well within a tropical system here. That's exactly what's going to make it fully tropical, not subtropical. So that's exactly where we really watching out for the really big bands of really heavy rain. Obviously, you're seeing your heaviest rain kind of more towards the outer I guess you see the eye wall, but you're going to be seeing some pretty intense rainfall, and that's going to be the main effect for the Philippines here, the eye or the outer bands here. Obviously, we're starting to get some outer bands here into the far eastern islands there, Philippines there. So we are seeing possibly some pretty significant amount of rain here across portions of the Philippines, and that will continue to be a bigger threat within the next 24 to 36 hours here as the storm possibly strengthens, moves a little bit closer to land. We're not looking at direct landfall at the moment here, but again, things can rapidly change, but there is a high pressure across not too far, basically almost over the Philippines here, that's going to really steer the storm a little bit towards the to the east here. So that's exactly the reason why we're not looking at a direct landfall, but still going to be seeing some pretty big impacts for the main islands here. So as we go a little bit more to the northeastern portion of the Philippines, that's going to be seeing a bigger threat within these outer bands here as the storm kind of moves a little bit. Right now, it looks like it's moving a little bit to the basically northwest, but that'll rapidly change as we go in the next 24 hours. It'll gradually get steered towards the east here. That's exactly what we have here on IR and invisible satellite imagery. So here's a look now at the latest update here on what we have. So again, this is expected to possibly become more into a super typhoon here. So at the moment, this is at 120 knots, and that is, I believe, 138 or 139 miles an hour. And it's expected to get to its peak here, of course, possibly by tomorrow here and Sunday here. So we're looking at the 18th here. It's we're looking at this getting up to 125 knots, which I believe is 144 or 145 miles an hour. So we're really getting up to a high end or kind of middle end category 4 typhoon here. Basically, it's gonna basically become a super typhoon. I mean, it's basically technically is right now, but it's gonna become a bit more defined super typhoon within the next day or so here. Again, we're not looking at direct landfall. We are going to be seeing the direct cone here of this eye kind of going towards the north, staying far east of the island here. But again, we are going to be looking at possibly for maybe portions of the eye wall to go over some areas, specifically there. Right in these islands. I'm not really familiar with any cities or the actual island names, but if you are within this area of the Philippines or know anybody there within the Philippines, I would recommend they do take shelter, at least have a plan, or evacuate towards islands to the east or to the west here. So if you are within these islands here, you guys are going to definitely possibly get the worst hit by the actual winds here. You guys are not too extremely far from the main low pressure, meaning you guys do possibly have the threat to get impacted from maybe some winds that are part of the eye wall here. Obviously, typically the western quadrants aren't necessarily the strongest, but again, we are going to possibly see some pretty intense storm surge as we see that kind of clockwise winds pushing those waters towards the west here. So we could see some pretty intense storm surge. But again, looking at the peak here tomorrow, 100 in the mid 140s there, so getting early at a pretty strong category 4 typhoon. And as it gradually makes its way towards cooler waters as it goes toward the north, it will rapidly decrease in strength here, getting up to 115 knots there by the 19th there, and then rapidly getting into sub 100 knots by the 20th. So it will rapidly decrease in strength here, but still going to be seeing possibly a peak nearly just nearly 145, 146 miles an hour. And is there a chance it could possibly get even stronger with the very warm SSTs we have in the region here, and maybe 130 knots? We cannot keep that as a possibility here. We're going to be a high-end category 4, so keeping a very close eye on these areas. So good thing is, not looking at a direct landfall at the moment here, but again, still got to keep a close eye on whether it can get a bit closer to land. So even if it's not a direct landfall, we can still have some pretty big impacts across some certain regions of the Philippines where we can possibly have really close interaction within the eye wall. So keep a very close eye on that. And again, since this is going to be pretty high, mid to high end category 4, and you're on the very, very, very edge of the eye wall, you can still possibly see over 100 miles an hour at least in some inland areas. So still going to be seeing some pretty big threats here for power outages. Definitely some significant damage concerning the area where it's going to impact a little bit more of a poor area of the Philippines here. At least what I know geography-wise within that region here. And of course, going to be seeing some really intense storm surge. They do, again, typically, if it's not like impacting the United States, they don't really give storm surge numbers, but I could definitely see over 6 feet storm surge, maybe even 12 feet storm surge across portions of the Philippines. It would be a lot higher if it were to be a lot closer at actually direct landfall. But again, looking at direct landfall, it's not going to be anywhere from maybe 100 miles to 200 miles within the coast here. But again, this eye wall can be very, very large. So let's look at the tracks here, the model guidance here with this storm here. As you do see again, the actually European gets it very, very close here, actually taking a little bit more of a northwestern approach all the way up to the northern Philippines here. And that's exactly why there's still the question of whether it could still get either closer to the Philippines or maybe even get extremely close to the Philippines here. So the European and some models are showing it actually making a landfall for northern Philippines. And if that were to happen, we're talking possibly a category 2 to category 3 landfall. If that were to happen, if it were to make landfall in the northern Philippines, I really doubt that. You kind of see a lot of in some models kind of towards the east of that actual main area there. That's the average. That's the average of all those models there. You see, but we do have a lot more kind of staying to the west than towards the west. And I do doubt a landfall for the Philippines, but if it maybe to get closer, and maybe like this, that could be possible where it gets a lot closer toward the Philippines, but I don't see a direct landfall. But again, we still have a lot to learn because of who knows, a high pressure can rapidly decrease in strength here, allowing for the high pressure to the east here to push this storm to the west here. So that's going to be the question: which high pressure will win? We got a high pressure here. We're going to have a high pressure here. Which one will be the strongest? And that's exactly going to be the question of whether it can possibly get closer, further, or maybe make a landfall on the Philippines. This is a look at the GFS and some models here. You see a lot different approach here. Way far to the east here. And if this were to happen, we'll be seeing a lot less storms. There's a lot less impact. Still some pretty significant rainfall and flooding here. We see only a few getting to the Philippines, and we kind of have the mean. I mean, at least maybe 150 miles there from portions of the east central Philippines. So like I did say, if you are in these areas, I would definitely keep a very close eye out, because although the GFS is very far from the actual landfall, you guys are going to be possibly seeing maybe the eye wall here. Look at the European. Definitely going to keep a close eye out being the European. And here's a look at the CMC here again. Actually, the CMC is taking this way off the coast here, but again, still got to keep a very close eye on that. So actually, now take a look here at the HRR on the 10-meter wind speeds in miles an hour. So let's go ahead and keep a look on this. So we're actually going to be looking at pressure a little bit later on in the video here. Let's go ahead and get a look at what we're seeing here. Wind speeds and exactly how bad can the impacts be in Philippines, and how strong are we expecting this to possibly get. So let's go ahead and go in the next few hours here. So as you do see, possibly the HBAR is taking this being at a super typhoon and possibly getting nearly Category 5 strength here. Again, I don't see that happening, but look at that. They're getting up to 152 miles an hour. Again, this is 10 meters, and this is surface winds. This is not the higher atmosphere or upper air winds here. So again, if we're talking Category 5, it would, of course, had to make its way towards around 159, 160. So it's getting there, but again, looking at very strong, very clear eye there, very low amount of convection, very high amount of convection here. You got the counterclockwise winds there, very high amount of vorticity, some outer bands, again, producing maybe even getting around the maybe 40 and even 60 there miles an hour. But let's go ahead and get further here as it nears the Philippines. So as we now get into the next 24 hours here, getting possibly maybe 159 miles an hour. So at this point, we are looking at getting nearly a Category 5 here. So again, a Category 5 is 157 miles an hour or higher, and it's getting it to a Category 5 basically. It's reaching Category 5. It's very small, a very small eye, but a very large and intense outer wall or eye wall. It's exactly what I'm saying. Portions of the Philippines could very well maybe get the tip there of the eye wall right here, the very far tip there, getting nearly, I'd say, gust up to at least 80 miles an hour across portions of the Philippines here. Again, this is look at the HRR, and you kind of see some really intense winds here just off the coast here, but again, it's going to get really strong. It's still 134, 130 miles an hour, still at a pretty decent storm here, and a weak Category 4 by the next 60 hours, but it's still going to pose a large threat across much of the eastern portion there, the Philippines, and it's going to gradually weaken as we go up to the northern portion there of Philippines in the cooler waters. This will gradually weaken here, getting to 119 miles an hour there, 117, 112. So it's going to rapidly decrease in strength here, but I mean, we're definitely looking at possibly a peak here. Let's see the peak here, what they're showing here. Actually getting up to 168.9 miles an hour. So that's way past Category 5 bound or a minimal Category 5 winds there. So keeping a very close eye on what the HBAR is saying here. Again, the HBAR does have a history of over forecasting storms by a mile, but they also have a history there, specifically last 2020 hurricane season, with being very accurate when it comes to the winds here. So we're going to keep a very close eye on that. Let's go ahead and look now at the actual central pressure here, or the surface pressure, and let's look at how low the pressure they get here. So right now we are sitting, I believe, let me actually see what we're looking at right now. So right now I believe we are at 940. We're actually at 942 millibars here. But if we go to the tropical tidbits, it's showing at 940 millibars. So basically we are at as low as 940 millibars here. But as we now Again, within the next 6 hours, it's going to rapidly decrease up to possibly 932.8. And then with the next 24 hours here, possibly going to get as low as 920. So we're talking 20 millibar drop within 24 hours. So gonna get, or actually that's actually not, that's 21 hours. So let's actually go to 24 hours, see how low that can get there. So in the next 24 hours, gonna get as low as 915 pressure, 915.6 there, right in the dead center there of where the eye is. We're gonna be seeing the strongest, we're gonna be seeing the weakest winds, but the strongest winds kind of outside there where we have those 920 millibar strengths, but gonna get as low as 915.6 millibars right in where we're going to be seeing kind of the eye of that storm there. So we're going to be dropping well over 25, even 26 millibars within 24 hours. So looking at maybe possibly, again, rapid intensification is really well possible. And getting it as low as 911, 910. So the lowest number, at least, is most likely going to happen within the next 36 hours here. So like I did say, we're looking at really watching out for Sunday for sure. 910 millibars there. So really intense storm there. I mean, very, very intense. And it's going to be very strong as it goes to the northern portion there, so at 9.6, still not at 9.19 there. It's going to rapidly weaken there, going at 9.35, 9.37. So it's going to be kind of weakening at the fast rate that it's going to be strengthening. So it's going to kind of be like a rapid, I guess, rapid death instead of rapid intensification here. So going to keep a very close similarity between the storm here. Then last but not least, or wind-wise, let's go ahead and look at the European here, the main European model, since it's very good with the tropics. So let's go ahead and look again what we're having right now. So it's kind of what we're gonna be looking at right now. Again, some pretty again, it's gonna be 10 mile an hour wind speed knots here. So this is actually knots and not miles an hour. They actually do not have a mile an hour option here, but it's turning about 87 miles an hour. But obviously that's a little bit on the lower side what we're expecting right now. But let's go ahead and get within the next few hours here. So let's go ahead and go within the next, let's go to the next 20 hours here and see what they show. So the next 20 hours, again, it's going to get a lot closer. Some really widespread winds here of over 20 knots here. Of course, very widespread storm with a very large area of over tropical storm winds. Again, this is not going to be gusts. It's going to be sustained winds. But they're getting, of course, as high as basically 100 knots there. But again, right now we're at I think 100, actually, let's actually see, I think we're at 120 knots right now, based on the latest update on the tropical tidbits. So it seems like this European is a little bit on the lower side. Global models wise to kind of show why we showed the HRR, but again, as you see, the Europeans going to show some pretty intense gusts here, across portions of the Philippines here. We may get areas that can get maybe, up to maybe tropical storm, maybe even hurricane wind sustained, maybe some gusts of over 80. So can you be very close by again? This all depends on whether the European is going to become true, whether it's going to be the GFS. And last but not least, go ahead and check out the rainfall. Again, big time threat is going to be the flooding and the storm surge, not necessarily the actual winds here. As you see, we're going to be seeing possibly nearly 4 feet of rain within the storm there. They got 42 inches there. I mean, nearly 4 feet of rain here from this intense storm here. You can kind of see some very intense rain, specifically for north central Philippines. We can possibly get nearly 3 feet of rain there. So we're talking extreme, not slight. We're talking extremely dangerous flash flooding here. Possibly 3 feet of rain, and then widespread areas. As far as even the even the western portions there of Philippines can possibly get nearly a foot of rain from this pretty intense storm here. So big time flooding across these areas in eastern and northern the Philippines there. So keeping a very close eye, and if this cone even moves a little bit to the west, even bigger threats there across these regions. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you guys later.